Hey, English learners. Welcome back to the English Power Shift podcast, your cozy place to learn natural English through meaningful conversations that help you improve both your English and your life. I'm Emma.
And I'm Adam. We're so happy you're here with us today.
Today, we're talking about something surprisingly simple,
Very simple.
something that has existed for centuries,
Something that doesn't require expensive equipment,
doesn't require special talent,
doesn't require perfect timing.
yet it has quietly changed millions of lives.
We're talking about reading,
Books,
stories,
ideas,
knowledge.
and the incredible power hidden inside a simple habit that many people underestimate.
You know, Emma, it's interesting.
What's that?
When people talk about improving their lives, they usually mention exercise, healthy eating, productivity, business, money, or success habits.
That's true.
But reading often gets pushed into the background.
Almost like it's a hobby instead of a life-changing tool.
Exactly.
Which is strange, because if you look at some of the most successful, thoughtful, and knowledgeable people in history, one habit appears again and again.
Reading.
Reading.
And reading. Yet many people stop reading regularly after school.
That's true.
For some people, reading starts feeling like work.
Or something they simply don't have time for.
Others say they're too busy.
Some say they can't focus long enough anymore.
And honestly, in today's world, that's understandable.
Very understandable.
We live in a world full of notifications,
Videos,
short clips,
constant updates,
endless scrolling,
information everywhere.
attention nowhere. Wow.
A little dramatic, but you know what I mean.
No, I do, and I think many listeners know exactly what you mean, too.
Because something interesting has happened.
What?
People are consuming more information than ever before.
Yet many feel like they're thinking less deeply.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
We read headlines, captions, comments, messages, tiny pieces of information all day long.
But deep reading is becoming less common.
And deep reading gives us something very different.
It slows the mind down.
It strengthens focus.
It expands vocabulary.
It develops imagination.
It teaches empathy.
It introduces us to ideas we might never discover on our own.
And perhaps most importantly,
It changes the way we think.
that's powerful.
Because every book is really a conversation.
A conversation?
Yes, when you read a book, you're spending time with someone's ideas.
Ah.
Sometimes someone living today.
Sometimes someone who lived hundreds of years ago.
You're learning from their experiences,
Their mistakes.
their discoveries.
Their way of seeing the world.
And that's incredible when you think about it.
It really is.
A person can spend years learning a lesson,
Then write it in a book.
and you can learn from it in a few hours.
That's almost like borrowing wisdom.
I love that phrase.
Me too.
Borrowing wisdom.
And that's one reason reading has always fascinated me.
Same here.
Every book is a chance to enter a different mind, a different life, a different perspective, a different world.
And the amazing thing is that you never finish a great book exactly the same person who started.
Maybe not dramatically.
Maybe not immediately, but something usually changes.
A new idea,
A new question,
a new perspective.
a new possibility.
And those small changes can become surprisingly powerful over time.
That's exactly what we're exploring today.
In this episode, we'll talk about why reading is so powerful, what happens inside your mind when you read regularly, why so many people struggle to read consistently, and how books can quietly transform the way you think, communicate, and understand the world.
And as always, we'll be doing all of this through natural English that you can actually use in real life. This is a B2 level episode, so you'll hear some richer vocabulary and useful expressions along the way.
But don't worry if you don't understand every word. Just relax and listen for the ideas, because language grows best when it feels meaningful.
And before we begin, we'd love to hear from you. What's the best book you've ever read?
Or if you're not a big reader yet, what's one book you've always wanted to read?
Tell us in the comments. We genuinely love to know. And if you enjoy these deeper conversations that help you improve your English while improving your thinking, don't forget to subscribe and join the English PowerShift family.
All right.
Let's begin.
You know, Emma, I think one of the biggest reasons reading changes people is that it gives them something modern life rarely offers anymore: uninterrupted thinking.
That's such an interesting way to describe it.
Think about the average day. Most people wake up and immediately start consuming information. Messages, notifications, headlines, videos, emails. The brain is constantly reacting to something. Someone wants your attention. An app wants your attention. A screen wants your attention. And after enough years of that, many people start feeling mentally busy all the time.
Yes, busy is the perfect word, because a lot of people are not physically exhausted, they are mentally exhausted. Their minds never really get a chance to slow down.
Exactly. And that's where reading becomes so powerful. A book asks something different from us. It asks us to stay with one idea long enough to understand it. It asks us to be patient. It asks us to pay attention. And at first, that can feel surprisingly difficult.
I think many listeners will recognize that feeling. You sit down to read, and after a few minutes, you suddenly want to check your phone. Not because anything important happened, just because your brain has become used to constant stimulation.
Right. And that's why I sometimes think reading is like exercise for attention. The more you practice it, the stronger your focus becomes. At first, maybe you can only focus for 10 minutes, then 20, then 30. Over time, your mind becomes calmer and more capable of staying with difficult ideas.
And what's fascinating is that this benefit doesn't stay inside the book. It starts affecting other parts of life, too. People often notice they can focus better during conversations. They listen more carefully, they think more clearly before speaking. Even their decision-making can improve because they are no longer jumping from thought to thought all day.
That's such a good point. Reading doesn't just teach information, it changes the quality of your attention, and attention shapes almost everything. The quality of your work, your relationships, your learning, even your happiness depends partly on where your attention goes.
So maybe the takeaway here is that reading is not simply a way to gain knowledge. It's a way to reclaim control of your mind in a world that is constantly trying to pull your attention in 100 different directions.
Yeah, because reading is not just collecting information, it's reclaiming attention.
I love that. Reading is not just collecting information, it's reclaiming attention.
Exactly. And once you start thinking about reading that way, it completely changes how you see it.
How so?
Because most people think they don't read because they don't have time. But in reality, they don't read because their attention is already being used somewhere else.
That's true.
Think about it. The moment you wake up, your attention is already taken. Your phone, social media, messages, news, videos, everything is competing for your mind before you even make a conscious decision.
So reading becomes difficult not because it's hard, but because your attention is already full.
Exactly. And that's why reading feels harder now than it used to. It's not the book that changed, it's the environment.
That's such an important point because a lot of people blame themselves. They say, I lost focus or I can't read anymore. But maybe it's not about losing focus. Maybe it's about having too many things fighting for it.
Yes, and when you remove some of that noise, something interesting happens. Reading becomes natural again.
You start enjoying it.
You start feeling calmer.
And your mind stops jumping so quickly from one thing to another.
Exactly. And that's where reading starts to feel almost like mental rest, not mental effort.
That's surprising, actually, because many people think reading is tiring.
But I think the real tiredness comes from switching attention all day long, not from reading itself.
That constant switching, messages, apps, notifications, it really drains people.
Yes, and reading is the opposite of that. It's stable, it's one direction, one flow of thought,
One voice.
one idea at a time.
And maybe that's why people say reading helps them feel grounded.
I like that word, grounded.
It feels like coming back to yourself.
Exactly. And there's another thing I've noticed. People who read regularly often think more clearly when they speak.
That's interesting.
Because reading trains your mind to follow structured thinking. Ideas have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Over time, your brain learns to organize thoughts in a similar way.
So it affects communication, too.
Very much. And especially for English learners, this is powerful.
Yes.
Because you're not just learning words, you're learning how ideas are connected.
Right. You start noticing how sentences flow,
How people explain things step by step.
how arguments are built.
How stories develop.
And that slowly becomes part of your own speaking style.
Exactly, without forcing it.
That's important because many learners try to memorize phrases, but reading gives you something more natural.
Yes, it builds intuition instead of memorization.
And intuition lasts longer.
Much longer.
You know, Adam, I also think reading gives people something emotional, not just intellectual.
What do you mean?
Well, when you read stories or even real experiences in books, you start understanding life in a deeper way. You see that other people struggle too. You see that confusion, fear, failure, these are universal.
That's true.
And that can be comforting
Very comforting.
because it makes you feel less alone in your thoughts.
And maybe even more patient with yourself.
Exactly. I think that's something a lot of people don't expect from reading,
They think it's just information.
but it's actually connection.
Connection to ideas.
Connection to people.
Connection to experiences you've never lived.
And that connection changes how you see the world.
You become more open,
More reflective.
less reactive.
That's a good word, reactive.
Yes, instead of reacting immediately, you think first.
And that small pause can change everything.
Completely. You know, sometimes I think reading is one of the few habits that makes people both calmer and more aware at the same time.
That's powerful.
Because calmness without awareness is ignorance.
And awareness without calmness is stress.
Exactly. Reading brings a balance between the two.
I like that idea.
Me too.
And I think we should also mention something practical here.
What's that?
Many people say, I want to read more, but I don't know how to start.
Yes, that's very common.
And maybe the answer is simpler than they think.
Probably.
Start small,
Very small.
like 5 minutes a day.
Or even one page.
Exactly. Not a goal that feels heavy,
Something that feels easy to repeat.
because consistency matters more than intensity.
Always.
And over time, that small habit grows naturally,
Without pressure.
without forcing it.
Just slowly becoming part of your life.
And that's how real change usually happens,
Quietly.
step by step,
Day by day.
until one day you realize you've become a reader without even trying to force it.
And that might be the best kind of change.
Yeah, the kind you don't even notice happening at first. And you know, Adam, I think one of the most interesting things about reading is that it looks simple from the outside, but the impact is actually very deep.
I agree. And I think most people underestimate it because it doesn't feel active like other habits.
Exactly. But when you think about it, reading is actually doing a lot at once. It's training your focus, expanding your vocabulary, improving your imagination, and also shaping the way you think.
And maybe that's why it feels harder for many people today. Not because reading itself changed, but because our attention has changed.
That's true. We live in a world where everything is fast, short, and constantly changing. So staying with one idea for a longer time can feel unusual at first.
But that slowness is actually what makes reading powerful. It forces the mind to settle, to stay with one train of thought instead of jumping around all the time.
And over time, that creates a different mental state. People often don't realize it, but reading regularly can make your thinking calmer and more structured.
Yes, and I think there's also something emotional about it. When you read, you're not just consuming information, you're entering a different perspective. You're seeing life through someone else's experience.
That's a good point. It makes you more open-minded because you start realizing that people think differently, live differently, and feel differently for reasons you might not see in everyday life.
Exactly. And that naturally builds empathy. You become less quick to judge and more curious about why people think the way they do.
And for English learners, there's another layer to this. Reading also improves your language in a very natural way. You don't have to memorize rules all the time. You just see how words and ideas are used in real contexts.
Yes, and that's important because learning through context is often more powerful than learning through isolation. You start recognizing patterns without even trying too hard.
And slowly, your speaking and writing improve without pressure. You just start sounding more natural because you've been exposed to natural language for a long time.
But I think there's also a reason why many people struggle to keep reading consistently, even if they want to.
Probably because of attention.
Exactly. Attention is constantly pulled in different directions, so when someone tries to read, their mind is already used to switching quickly between things.
And that makes reading feel unfamiliar at first. Not impossible, just unfamiliar.
Yes, and there's also the energy factor. A lot of people want to read, but they only try at the end of the day when they're already tired.
That's true. And when you're tired, your brain naturally chooses easier forms of entertainment.
Right. Something passive, something quick, something that doesn't require effort.
And reading needs a bit of effort in the beginning, not because it's difficult, but because it requires focus.
Another thing is expectations. Many people think reading has to be long or serious to count.
Yes, like they need to finish a whole book quickly or read for hours.
Exactly, and that creates pressure, so they avoid starting at all.
But in reality, reading can be very small. Even a few pages can be meaningful if it's consistent.
And that's the key word, consistency. Because reading is not about intensity, it's about repetition over time.
And that's where the real change happens. Not in one big moment, but in small, repeated actions.
Which is actually good news because it makes reading accessible to everyone.
Yes. Anyone can start with just a few minutes a day.
And over time, that small habit builds momentum without forcing it.
And something interesting happens then. Reading starts to feel less like effort and more like a natural part of your day.
Almost like a mental break instead of a task.
Exactly. A break from noise, from distraction, from constant input.
And maybe that's one of the biggest hidden benefits of reading today. It gives your mind a place to slow down.
A place to focus on one thing at a time.
And in a world where everything is competing for your attention, that's actually a very powerful skill.
So maybe reading is not just about learning new things.
It's also about protecting your attention.
And training your mind to think more clearly.
And that combination is what makes it so powerful in the long term.
Slowly, quietly, without pressure.
Just small moments that add up over time.
And maybe that's enough reason to start today.
Even with one page.
You know, Adam, I think what makes reading really powerful is not just the idea of reading itself, but the way it slowly changes how you see your own life.
That's true, because when you read different books, you're basically meeting different ways of thinking.
Exactly. And that's something many people don't realize. A book is not just information, it's a perspective. It's how someone else understands life, problems, success, fear, or even happiness.
And when you spend time with those perspectives, they start influencing your own thinking without you noticing.
Yes. For example, I remember reading a book about habits, and it completely changed how I think about motivation.
Oh, really? How so?
Before that, I used to think motivation was the most important thing. Like, if I don't feel motivated, I can't do anything.
That's very common.
But the book explains something simple. Motivation is temporary, but systems are permanent.
That's a strong idea.
It is. And after that, I started looking at my life differently. Instead of waiting to feel ready, I started building small routines that didn't depend on motivation.
That's a perfect example of how reading becomes practical, not just theoretical.
Exactly. And I think every reader has moments like that, where a single idea from a book quietly shifts something inside them.
Yes, and those shifts don't always feel dramatic at first, but over time they change decisions, habits, and even identity.
That's why I think reading is almost like a long-term conversation with very smart people.
I like that description.
You don't just read and forget. You read, you reflect, and then parts of it stay with you.
And sometimes those parts come back to you when you need them most.
Exactly.
You know, since we're talking about real examples, maybe we should mention a few books that have had this kind of impact on people.
Yes, that would help our listeners.
One of the most well-known books in personal development is Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Oh yes, that's a great example. It focuses on small habits and how tiny improvements over time lead to big results.
And what's powerful about it is that it doesn't feel overwhelming. It shows that change doesn't require huge effort, just consistency.
Another example I like is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho.
That's more of a story, right?
Yes, but it carries a deep message about following your goals and listening to your inner voice. It's simple, but very emotional.
I think stories like that stay in people's minds longer because they connect with feelings, not just logic.
Exactly, and that's the beauty of reading different types of books. Some books teach you systems, others teach you emotions, and others teach you perspective.
Another interesting one is Deep Work by Cal Newport.
Oh yes, that one connects perfectly with what we said earlier about attention.
Exactly. It explains how focused work without distraction is becoming more and more valuable in today's world.
And when you read a book like that, you start noticing your own habits differently, like how often you check your phone without thinking.
Right. It creates awareness.
And awareness is the first step to change.
There's also Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
That's a classic.
Yes, it focuses more on mindset, belief, and persistence. Even though it's old, many of its ideas are still discussed today.
And I think that shows another important point. Good books don't expire quickly.
True, because human behavior doesn't change that fast.
Exactly.
You know, something I've noticed is that many people think reading is only for studying or learning facts.
Yes.
But in reality, reading is also about self-reflection.
How so?
Because when you read about other people's experiences, you naturally start comparing them with your own life.
That's true.
And sometimes you realize things about yourself that you never thought about before.
Like patterns in your thinking.
Or habits you didn't notice.
Or even beliefs you've been holding without questioning.
Exactly.
And that makes reading very personal.
Very.
It's not just external knowledge, it's internal awareness.
And that's why two people can read the same book and walk away with completely different lessons.
Because they are not just reading the book, they are reading themselves through the book.
That's beautifully said.
Thank you.
And maybe that's the real secret power of reading.
What is?
It doesn't just change what you know.
It changes how you think.
And slowly how you live.
Quietly, without pressure.
One idea at a time, and I think that's exactly why reading feels so different from other habits.
It doesn't push you, it doesn't rush you, it just slowly changes the way your mind works. And I think at this point, it's important to connect everything we talked about to something very practical for our listeners.
What do you mean?
Because many people might be thinking, okay, reading is powerful, but how do I actually make it part of my life?
That's a good question.
And I think the answer is much simpler than people expect.
Go on.
It's not about becoming a serious reader overnight. It's about building a small, realistic habit that you can actually maintain.
So starting small again.
Always small, because small is sustainable.
I like that. Sustainable means something you can continue over time without losing motivation or energy.
Exactly. For example, instead of saying, I will read every day for 1 hour, you can simply start with 10 minutes.
Or even 5 minutes.
Yes, and the important part is not the time itself, but the consistency.
Because consistency builds identity.
That's powerful.
If you read a little every day, you slowly start seeing yourself as a reader.
And once that identity is formed, the habit becomes easier to maintain.
You know, Emma, I think this connects to something very interesting. People often wait for motivation to start reading.
Yes.
But motivation is not stable.
It comes and goes.
Exactly. So if you depend on it, your habits will also come and go.
That's why systems are more reliable than motivation.
Systems like I read for 10 minutes before bed, or I read 1 page after breakfast.
Yes, simple triggers that remove decision-making.
Because the less you have to decide, the easier it becomes to act.
And that's a very important point. Decision fatigue is real.
Very real.
The more decisions you make during the day, the harder it becomes to make good ones later.
Which is why habits should feel automatic, not forced.
Exactly. And reading can easily become automatic if you connect it to something you already do.
Like drinking coffee.
Or sitting on the bus.
Or before sleeping.
Small moments that already exist in your routine.
That's a great strategy.
And over time, something interesting happens. You stop thinking of reading as a task.
And it becomes part of your lifestyle.
Exactly.
You know, Emma, I also think it's important to talk about expectations again.
Why?
Because many people quit reading too early.
That's true.
They expect immediate change. They expect to feel smarter, more focused, or more inspired after just a few days.
But reading doesn't work like that.
No, it's a slow transformation.
Like fitness for your mind.
Exactly. You don't see results after 1 workout.
You see them after weeks or months of consistency.
Reading is the same.
And maybe even more subtle.
Yes, because the changes are internal.
You don't always notice them directly.
But over time, you realize you think differently.
You understand things faster.
You express yourself better.
You become more patient with complex ideas.
And more comfortable with silence and focus.
That's a big one.
It is.
Because modern life makes silence feel uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable.
But reading teaches you to stay with it.
To stay with your thoughts instead of escaping them.
And that's actually a form of mental strength.
Yes, not loud strength, but quiet strength.
I like that.
Me too.
You know, before we finish this episode, I think it would be nice to bring back the emotional side of reading.
What do you mean?
Because beyond productivity, beyond vocabulary, beyond habits, reading also gives people something deeper.
Like what?
Perspective, comfort, understanding.
That's true.
Sometimes you read a book and realize you're not alone in what you're feeling.
That's very powerful.
Or you read a story and suddenly understand someone else's life a little better.
And that changes how you see people.
Exactly.
So reading is not just about improving yourself.
It's also about understanding others.
And understanding yourself.
Yes.
And maybe that's why books have lasted so long.
Probably.
Because they speak to something very human.
Something that doesn't change quickly.
Our need to understand life.
And our need to make sense of it.
And reading helps with that, quietly and patiently.
1 page at a time.
1 idea at a time.
1 moment at a time.
And slowly, it builds something much bigger than a habit.
It builds a way of thinking.
A way of seeing the world.
And maybe even a better version of yourself.
I think that's a perfect place to end.
Me too.
And to our listeners, start small, stay consistent, and don't underestimate the power of 1 page.
This is Emma.
And this is Adam.
And you've been listening to the English Power Shift podcast.
See you in the next episode.
Bye.